Good afternoon again. I would like to present Mrs. Irina Akin from the Institution of Archaeology Vasil Parvan in Bucharest, Romania. Her presentation is entitled as A Carnelian Gem from Capidava, province of Scythia, Some Considerations about an Exquisite Object in Context. Mrs. Akin, you have 15 minutes. You may please begin.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. Dear colleagues, before getting into the heart of the topic of my communication, I want to express my gratitude to Professor Aegaea and his crew for accepting without hesitation my paper proposal for the conference, although I am not a consecrated voice in this particular field of Greek. The talk focused on a cryptic object identified during the 2015 rescue excavation season on the site of the only Christian cult building known until now at Capidava in Constanța County in Romania. Thus, the intaglio comes from the destruction level of a building conventionally called CR number 2 that predates the Christian edifice on the same intramuros peripheral parcel in the area of the B and C segments of the late Roman defensive wall. To introduce the subject, I will quickly refer to Castellum Capidava, and I will specify that the site is a small citadel installed on the banks of the Danube, halfway between Axiopolis and Carsium, as meant according to Tabula Poitingeriana. The fort is erected on a limestone terrace which overlooks the right bank of the river and offers good visibility over the mainland. The fort, erected during Trajan's Dacian War, was rebuilt a fundamentis at the time of Aurelian or Probus, with other stages of reconstruction documented in the last quarter of the 4th century, then in the second half of the 5th century, and in the 6th century. In the late antique period, Capidava was successively the seat of the cavalry units responsible for controlling a fort on the Danube. However, from the 4th to 6th century, Capidava sheltered various public and private buildings within its walls, among which we find at the northeast corner a single-nave church built not earlier than the end of the 5th century. The rescue excavation carried out in the summer of 2015 inside the church nave, within the limits of a pre-existing trench dated back to the 2000s that covered the entire width of the nave and intended to verify the foundations of the north and south perimeter walls of the cult buildings. On this occasion, in the vicinity of the church's north wall, two late Roman buildings were partially uncovered, which quickly followed one another on the parcel where the church was built in the 6th century. The building to the west, named CR number 1, which extends north of the church in the direction of the defensive wall to which it is attached, seems to be chronologically posterior to the Z9 wall, which is located at the eastern limit of the excavation in the both trenches dug here in 2015. Z9 is part of a large building whose exact configuration also remained unknown. The building is conventionally named CR number 2. From the destruction layer of building CR2, to which Z9 belongs, in the stratum number 8 of the survey of the southern vertical stratigraphic section, 37 points were collected, which form the main core of a hoard consisting of 44 coins in total, at depth of approximately 3 meters. The series opens with a follis of Licinius minted in Thessaloniki in 312-313. The latest two coins dated back to 341-348. To the group of 37 bronzes that form Hoard 1, can be added another 6 coins discovered on the northern flank of the church, so extra ecclesiam, and a 7th one, which was identified in the name, but outside the limit of the excavation. Their chronology and state of preservation, comparable to those of the main body of the hoard, identified here, plead for their belonging to the same lot, with the mention that they could have been moved from their initial position in the vicinity of the defensive wall during the construction works of the church. The evoked coin hoard is associated in the same archaeological context, pertaining to the destruction of the building CR number 2, with several other artifacts related to personal equipment uncovered immediately west to the Z9 wall. These are 2 bronze objects, one of which could be a bracelet worked in a thin metallic wire, and an object made of animal heart tissues, possibly ivory, remarkable for the quality of execution, as well as a finger ring partially preserved. The preserved elements of the metal ring allow the observation that the traces of corrosion specific to bronze are absent. Even in the absence of a metallographic analysis, it may be worth to underline that the bezel mass is fairly light, suggesting a possible silver metal work. The digital accessory has an oval-shaped carnelian intaglio with flat surface and an oblique edge. The engraved gem was cut in a dark orange translucent stone whose facet has fine scratches. The ring, whose bezel is in a poor state of preservation, has a plain rim and a closed back. At the moment of the discovery, the stone was still preserved at its place in the bezel. The intaglio exhibits Victoria and personification of Fortuna facing each other. Victoria is standing right, leaning on tiptoes, with no presented trace of ground. With her right hand, the goddess holds a rat, with which she is about to crown Fortune, who stands facing her. She wears a 2-paneled garment which floats behind her, and the unfolded wing is detached from the body. Fortuna is standing left with Cornucopia. She is wearing a long tunic. In her left hand, she holds a steering oar and ruler. In terms of artistic treatment, the 2 divine figures are depicted on the stone relatively close to one another. In between the 2 deities, in the lower part of the decorative field, it is engraved in Greek on 2 lines, a short inscription. We can read the acclamation Zoe on 2 lines, we can read the acclamation. So the letters of the first line having a slight inclination to the right, with the letter in the second line located outside the decorated field. On a detailed examination of the stone's surface, engraving marks here can be seen next to Fortuna's neck, which are liable to several interpretations. So I wonder if this detail could indicate a possible reuse of an old gemstone or an unfinished gemstone, or a simple engraving error of the craftsman. We can also mention that the engraving technique is not so accurate. The anatomical details, especially the head and the clothes, are figured in a schematic and rather unstructured manner. The intradecorative acclamation in Greek reproduced a concise epigraphic formula which could be considered an appeal for divine help and protection of its owner. From an iconographic perspective, the representation of victory and fortune is common on Roman intaglios in almost all regions of the empire. In our case, the choice of such a subject could be understood as symbolic reference to the Roman army, the desire of success in the battle, and the need for divine protection of the owner, probably a soldier from the garrison in Capidava. The site has an indisputable military character. A unit of Equites Scutari is attested at Capidava during the Dominant, which was replaced at the beginning of the 4th century by a Cuneus Equitum Solentium. So I will not insist on the frequency with which Victoria and Fortuna, most often unassociated, appear in the iconography of the gemstones that compose the most important collections of minor art in the region. The collection of the Museum of National History and Archaeology in Constanza, and the collection of the numismatic cabinet of the Library of the Romanian Academy in Bucharest. At the same time, another detail may be very significant here. Victoria and Fortuna are absent from the iconography of the coinage composing the hoard one found in the same stratigraphical assemblage with our gemstone. Nevertheless, several specimens of Constantinian numi at the Gloria Exercitus type or Gloria Dominorum Augustorum Nostrorum type struck at the final period of coin issues of the sons of Constantine, so before the reform of 348, do appear in the configuration of the hoard. Relevant iconographic comparisons are offered by two Carnelian gemstones from the collections of the Museum of the City of Belgrade in Serbia, engraved with victories and personifications of Fortuna in the same symbiotic relationship, even if the order of the narrative is reversed. A certain kinship between one of these two gemstones of Belgrade and that one of Capidava, to which the first can be compared through the posture of the characters, the schematic engraving technique, as well as by the manner in which certain attributes appear, for instance, the wreath of victory. A rapid bibliographic summary.
I'm sorry, Ms. Sakim, it's 3 o'clock, so you may need to reconsider how you are going to proceed the presentation. I'm sorry for
in this context, and so let me 2 minutes to read the
yes, of course.
In this context, and even through the complete investigation, the CR2 buildings was not possible at the moment of the excavation 6 years ago. The carnelian gem from Capidava and the associated finds from form a closed deposit which can provide valuable clues to the reconstruction of a part of the lost history of an ancient built structure severely affected by contemporary or subsequent historic events. Thus, CR2 buildings could have been a military structure, maybe a military barrack, located at the periphery of the late Roman fort of Capidava, which had at least 2 phases of evolution during the 3rd and mid-4th century AD. The ring adorned with the gemstone could have belonging to a soldier with the financial means and the direct possibility to procure personal equipment of this type. The entire trousseau has been possibly kept alongside bronze coin hoard 1 in a closed container made of perishable material. All these personal belongings were lost in the fire that destroyed the building, sometimes in the middle of the 4th century. After the fire, the entire perimeter was leveled and a new construction were installed here at short distance from the previous one. Thank you very much, and excuse me.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much for these wonderful presentations. We have comments, but I think it's better to discuss at the end of the session. If you are all okay with that, we may proceed to the next presentation. Now we will watch a pre-recorded PowerPoint video, which has the title, A Chalcedonic Stamp Seal from Tauric Chersonesus, and it is sent to us by Mrs. Novoselova and Mrs. Arsentieva from the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia, and Mrs. Namoylik from the State Historical Archaeological Museum, Reserve Tauric Chersonesus in Sevastopol, Russia.
Hello, dear colleagues. My name is Elena Arsentieva, and today I have the honor to present our report, A Chalcedonic Stamp Seal from Tauric Chersonesus. The Chalcedony has been known for a long time. Its rich palette has made it one of the most common materials in glyptic and jewelry art. Until now, the most popular types of the stone are in use: striped agates, red carnelians, brownish sards, greenish chrysoprase. Used the term chalcedony in a narrow sense is usually applied to the less preferred shades of the smeral of smoky gray or transparent ash tones, also related to the milky blue shimmering stone usually called sapphirine. Such objects cannot be called widespread, although tools, beads, and arrowheads made of this kind of chalcedony have been known since the Neolithic era. Artifacts made of great chalcedony of similar tones are a smaller part of the Hermitage collection of ancient engraved gems, although the smoke and shining bluish colors of the mineral were highly appreciated by the jewelers and engravers of ancient Greece and Rome. For example, the museum collection contains a sufficient number of a wide variety of jewelry with chalcedony, beads, pendants, rings, and tiaras, where other precious stones and metals accompany the mineral of smooth, rounded cabochon. These are the items from the Hermitage collection: the central part of the diadem, a Heckeln knot, a bracelet with chalcedony bead, and a scabbard detail. In addition to them, there are ribbed or grooved beads, barrel-shaped, cone-shaped, and also curly, in the form of bottles, weights, cubes, astragals, and even handshakes. These types of jewelry, made of smoothly polished chalcedony, were often equipped with bronze or silver details, mounts, or hooks. Also, there were finger rings made of the whole fragment of the mineral. They usually had a circular hoop, sometimes with relief decoration, and flat bezel with engraved figures, which could be used as a seal. The chalcedony was often used for carving. We can see intaglios with a symbol, a figure, or a bust. The Hermitage collection of Greek and Roman engraved gems contains a large amount of the chalcedony examples of various periods. We can select two extreme points marking the period of their special popularity. The latest one in chronological order, but the most spectacular outwardly, are the cameos in very high relief, especially the items that can be classified as round sculpture, figurines, heads, or bust representations made from the whole piece of a rather large mineral. Following the Hellenistic traditions, most of them were made in the Roman imperial period and had almost a similar form as marble or bronze sculpture, except their backs. Cameos in the form of heads or busts, usually frontal or three-quarter view, usually had a circular background. The statues cut in round with an only small flat rose area looks more sculptural. However, they were not intended for a circular view. These are the figurines of gods and heroes, which were used as weights and counterweights for scales for the decorative design of furniture, parts of chariots, and ceremonial weapons. The second part of the Roman imperial chalcedony sculptures is the portraits of emperors and their family members. They were used for decoration of priestly diadems, ceremonial interior items, for private shrines of the imperial cult. According to Pliny, there was a large statue of Nero made of smoky chalcedony, so-called Colloquias. Smoky is the literal translation from Greek, or velut fumo infecta in Latin, as he said, if it covered with a haze. There are a few items in the Hermitage collections, such as Annius Verus, Septimius Severus, Faustina, Cupid head, who was often considered as deified emperor's child. These chalcedony sculptures, acquired from various private collections, are added in the second chronological group of objects made from this kind of chalcedony of bluish color, so-called sapphirine. These are gems in the shape of scarabaeus, with a convex back with a flat side for engraving. The mineral of rather big dimensions was drilled in the center to attach a hoop or a cord. Such specimens were widespread in the Eastern Mediterranean glyptic of classical period. This is confirmed by a splendid collection of archaeological finds, which comes from burials of the necropolises of the Greek colonies in the northern Black Sea area. The Hermitage possesses a splendid collection of monuments of this kind, including the objects by the famous Dexamenus of Chios. It is very engaging that the subjects of engraved compositions often had a close connection to the East and will belong to the group of so-called Greco-Persian games. For instance, the images of Persian of the Achaemenid Sphinx is presented on this slide. The Greeks also associated Asia Minor with the Chalcedony place of origin, although the sources of production were in Egypt and Western Europe. They named the mineral after the Greek town Chalcedon, now a district in modern Istanbul. It is known from the written sources that citizens of Chalcedon and Chios, the Dexamenus motherland, often came to the cities of the northern Black Sea region, for example, Pantikapaeum, and received special rights and privileges of so-called proxenia. The Bosporan kings invited foreigners as jewelers to make coin stamps, decorate ceremonial weapons, and the costume. From the end of the 5th century to the beginning of the 3rd century BC, the visiting artists worked constantly, including the gem engravings such as the Xamenos. The latest item in this scarabæoid group is the rarest type of seal made of sapphire. This is a gem found in a barrow near the site of Gorgipe on Taman Peninsula and dates back to the late 4th century to early 3rd century BC. It is a large piece of stone in the shape of scarabæoid with engraving, but the decoration is placed on the convex side, not on the flat base. In that way, the convex side of the gem becomes the walking side of the stamp, where the nude figure of a standing Apollo was placed. Symbolizing the end of using scarabæoid, this monument has the transitional position to the new form of seals with the carved rounded surface, which is often accompanied by the mount in the shape of a ring. Such examples were produced from the Hellenistic period till Roman imperial time, up to the end of the traditional using stamps in the Greek-Roman world. A special place in the second, I mean the oldest group of Chalcedony seals, belong to the unique rectangular stamps with an untypical engraving. This outstanding object was found 3 years ago by the Hermitage Archaeological Expedition in Tauric Chersonesus under the direction of Nadezhda Novoselova. During the excavations, the building complex was discovered, which now is conventionally called the House of Archelaus. It has existed almost until the end of the 2nd century BC, erected in the second half of the 4th century BC. The Chalcedony stamp was found under stone that had fallen from the masonry 25. Analyzing the ceramic material, the researchers found out the period of the wall's construction. It has taken place not later than the 1st quarter of the 3rd century BC. The piece of mineral of rectangular shape with the dimensions 3.5 and 2.5 centimeters has a base for mounting handle on its backside. The face side has a retrograde 3-line inscription and 2 emblems in intaglio. The text is clearly read as Astinomuntos Herakleu. The translation is Heracleus being Astinomos, and a bunch of grapes and a caduceus. The engraving was carried out at a high professional level. The letters are accurate and easy to read. Some of them have the decoration with thicknesses at the ends of their haste and subtly traced curves. According to Anna Namulik, the shapes of kappa, mu, nu, and sigma are typical for the classic time, while small omicron and ornamentation are more common for the Hellenistic period. This kind of paleographic characteristics combination is recorded in ceramic stamps and legend of coins of Chersonesus of the late 4th to the early 3rd century BC. As for the technique, the engraving is executed very carefully. Letters and straight lines are clearly legible, as they were cut very accurately and deeply with the disc-shaped drill. The decorations were added by rounded wheel grooves and small butterel for the bunch of grapes. This type of modeling is typical for the Hellenistic period, when many gems display a tendency to exaggerate their butteral work and have palettes in an unusual place, as Dr. Marianne Muscat-Climbing said. She has identified 2 main styles of carving of this period dated back from the 300 BC, Campanian and Hellenistic Roman style and Italic Republican palette style, which had parallels in contemporary coin engraving of Italian cities. For example, the same technique the artist used to produce an intaglio from the collection of royal coin cabinet in The Hague. There are 2 frontal busts represented Isis and Hermes with butteral hair and the same shape of Kerikeon. This gem is also referred to as Italian production. However, taking into account the close ties and contacts of the Hellenistic world, the relocation of many jewelers and engravers from various cities to Rome and the regional affiliation of the workshop is not always concretized. Intaglio carvers had to have a certain level of knowledge and skill to make an in-depth negative image. At the same time, a set of tools of small size and weight was quite suitable for transportation. That is why some scholars conclude that engravers and jewelers were more inclined to mobility within fairly large areas than to centralized production within a single workshop. Regarding the symbolism of figurative elements of the seal, one can note there are rather wide popularity in glyptic jewelry art and numismatic. For example, Panticapaeum coins with the image of a bunch of grapes, gold rings with relief grape decoration are known. In glyptic, they are most often found in scents with satyrs and maenads, symbolizing, according to Professor Hennig, a good and grape harvest. The bunch, as an independent element that occupies the entire field of the gem, is associated with Aegaea, or with one of the eastern provinces, and is understood as an allegory of prosperity and well-being. The caduceum is traditionally preserved as an attribute of Hermes Mercury, and the semantic of the image is by the diverse functions of the deity and is widely interpreted by researchers, for instance, success in trading, good fortune, and peace. Dr. Plantzos selected a special group of Hellenistic seals with religious and political symbols and included the caduceus into it. However, these two images on the stamp, a bunch of grapes and Colloquia, are not the most common emblem for seals of Chersonesus magistrates. There are only 6 dies with semblance, and just 4 of them are with grapes. They are dated from the later period and are not similar to the grapes on the Chalcedonic seal, neither in shape nor in technique of engraving. Colloquia has not been attested among emblems on stamped ceramic wares of Chersonesus. The main thing is that no stamp impressions by the seal have been found in Chersonesus or elsewhere. However, Chersonesus amphora stamps have evidence of astronomer named Heraclea. 2 of them held the office in the late 4th century and 2 others in the late 3rd century BC. This name was particularly popular in Turkic Chersonesus. Epigraphic and numismatic sources mention nearly a dozen different people with the same name living in the city during the Hellenistic period. As astronomer Heraclea are known only in Chersonesus, the keeper of the seal could be a magistrate who worked there in the late 4th, early 3rd century BC. Ancient dies for stamping earthenware are extremely rare finds. Only one discovered in 1961 on the island of Tarsus is comparable of Chersonesus seal. At first it was made of clay and then baked. The engraved representations are the inscriptions and an amphora as an emblem, which has been not found as imprinting yet. Supposedly the stamps for pottery, mostly made of clay, were in use only limited time and then disappeared. This suggestion could explain the fine lack with stamps abundance. The clay stamps were used for marking ceramic containers and for ornamentation pottery for imprinting different images on ritual breads and votive medallions. Besides that, wooden dies with the Greek inscriptions and names of vineyards were found in Egypt. Bronze dies were used in the Roman period for stamping bread, fabric, and leather. As for dies made of stone, they seem to have been less common because of the tradition of using engraved gems for sealing. Named dies of the official were obviously to be destroyed after the term of office has been completed. The Chalcedonic stamp of Astinous Heracleus from Chersonesus has accepted this fate, and that's why nowadays it's a unique object with no direct analogy. The absence of identical or similar seals and the small depth of the letter's relief allow suggesting its purpose, not for earthenware, but more plastic and soft material, for example, wax. In addition, the functions of the astronomy were not connected with ceramic production. This is why the stamp using could be related to other activities of these officials. Usually they occupied one of the lowest levels in the administrative system of the Greek polis during a year. Astronomy were in charge of maintenance of streets, canalization, water supply system, building and walls. Placed the city, including supervising fees of women who played aulo and harps. Generally, the common set of duties could have local additions and differences, for example, registration land plot sales or setting stels with inscriptions. Astronomy of Chersonesus probably have a transitive step to a higher position, as we can suggest by the find of a unique Chalcedonic stamp made of precious stone, the production of which was rather difficult and expensive. Being a person of high social and material status, these magistrates highly likely use the seal for marking documents, for example, copies of decrees on papyri. Summing up, we would like to emphasize the outstanding importance of above-mentioned Chersonesus find. While being a unique monument, at the same time, it becomes a significant part of the world collection of classical Chalcedonic seals. Furthermore, it makes possible some new additions to the magistracy of astronomy in Tauric Chersonesus research. Thank you for your attention.
Is this the presentation from Mrs. Aristea Papastafopoulou?
Yes.
Okay, she works at the Ephorate of Antiquities of Theotida and the Britannia in Lamia, Greece.
A Roman period magic amulet from the
Yes, congratulations.
in Pelasgia Beach, Theotida, Greece. Amulets sometimes seek to help the avoidance of or prevention of evil, and sometimes they seek to help the achievement of good and felicity. The process was based on the belief that by invoking the supernatural powers that each object contained and came from a demon or god, this object acquired miraculous properties. In many cases, the amulets had designs and inscriptions invoking the support of the deities. Although the basic principle was that amulets generally provided the holder with the help needed, it was believed that some objects had special properties based on their appearance. For example, galactite was supposed to facilitate the flow of milk to breastfeeding women, while amethyst was considered to protect humans from the effects of wine drinking. The stones were used as amulets mainly by doctors for healing purposes. As a result, the belief in their supernatural power was strengthened. In his book on simple drugs of strength and power, Claudius Galinos talks about mineral drugs. The appearance of gemstones and their brilliance proved their relationship with the stars. These ideas, which were widely spread, came from the field of astrology and magic. They were in sympathy with the gods, the planets, the constellations, and especially with the sun and the moon. Ancient writers dealt extensively with stones, their significance and use. The belief in the supernatural power of stones is considered to have been very strong in late antiquity. Dioscurides Pedanios, a Greek doctor, in his work on the subject of medicine, examines the stones from a medical and pharmaceutical point of view, trying to get away from the prejudices about the magical properties of the stones. Another doctor, Alexander of Tralles, collected all data about the belief of stones in his medical books. The magic amulets of the Roman Empire period were engraved on semi-precious stones such as jasper, chalcedony, hematite, quartz, lapis lazuli, carnelian, agate, obsidian, steatite. They are designed to provide their owners with health, well-being, and love. Their typology follows the forms of Roman sculpture with influences from Mesopotamia and Egypt. They have characteristic inscriptions, signs, and images that are engraved usually on their both sides. Deities and demons are depicted on the stones. The engraved inscriptions that are read from left to right are often incomprehensible to the people who don't have the appropriate knowledge, since they do not make sense although they are in the Greek alphabet. Cryptographic symbols are engraved next to the texts and representations, the so-called characters, each of which is considered to be the secret seal of a god. The amulet under discussion comes from the research in the cemetery in Agios Konstantinos Hill in Pelasgia Beach in East Theotida. The area is located at the southeastern foothills of Mount Orthres at an altitude of 216 meters over Marian Gulf. Part of it is crossed by the highway in the context of the construction of which during the period 1995-1998 an excavation was carried out by the 14th Ephorate of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities. The southern lower part of an unknown fortified city was discovered, the foundation of the fortification of which is visible and runs along the sloping northeastern side of the hill. Its coastal area was destroyed by the construction of the Athens-Thessaloniki National Road during the 60s and because of marine erosion. The architectural remains and the residential organization of the excavated part of the city showed its prosperity from the first half of 5th century to the 4th century BC. After the middle of 4th century BC, the city was gradually abandoned, perhaps due to the catastrophic earthquake of 426 BC, which affected the wider area of Malian Gulf, or due to the events that followed the violent imposition of Macedonian rule in Achaea Theotida. The whole city desolation was followed by the reuse of a significant part of the settlement as a cemetery from the late Hellenistic to the early Roman period. In the part of the cemetery, 71 tombs were located. The abundance of building materials and the soft rocky subsoil of the area influenced the location and construction of the tombs. The magic amulet was found inside Tomb 30. Tomb's interior was full of soil. Near the outer western side of the tomb, a bone recovery was found, and in the inside, the bone recoveries of 5 people burials was found. In the upper part of the tomb, decomposed skeletal remains were found. These remains were scattered throughout the tomb's interior. 2 skulls were found down to the tomb's ground in the northwestern part and one in the center of the tomb. The period of use of the tomb is dated from the middle of the 1st to the middle of the 3rd century AD, according to the findings. One of the 6 coins were found inside the tomb. 2 of them were identified and dated, a bronze one to the beginning of the 1st century and a silver one to the middle of the 3rd century. Also, they were collected from inside an intact copper ring, well preserved, with a key-shaped sling, and 17 iron nails were found scattered. From the interior of the tomb, fragments of glass unguentaria were collected. Few animal bones were also collected, as well as possible remains of sacrifice or funeral dinner, and 2 fragments of seashells, poor preserved. On a skull of one of the bone recoveries, a stone with strong magical symbolism was found. It is a magic amulet engraved with the form of Numis. The amulet is an intact, elliptical-shaped, semi-precious chrysoprase stone, greenish in color, translucent, with yellowish and brown shades. The front side is slightly concave and the back side is flat. On the obverse, in a frame marked by a shallow engraved groove, a carved radial serpent with a roaring lion's head to the left is depicted. The head is framed by 12 rays, and 2 small lines are engraved near the nose. The details are also rendered by engraving. The tongue between the jaws, the scales of the body, the left eye, and the hairy hand, which is turned 3/4 to the left for the viewer. In the left, in the right, and below the form there are engraved letters Χ, Νι, Omicron, Y, Mi, Iota. According to the inscription, it is Chnumis. On the reverse, there is an engraved inscription and in the center a symbol with 3 Latin S, which are connected to each other with a horizontal line, the most famous magic symbol of the group of magic stones that had the form of Chnumis. There is an engraved inscription with 24 capital Greek letters in the periphery of the stones. The soror meriofergdimagro frames the sigmoidal triple pattern which has letters on both sides. Y, rho, iota above and Ni, gamma, sigma below. The sigmoidal symbol runs through the middle of an horizontal line with the vertical end at its right end. The Egyptian god named Knemos or Knum or Knif is related to the creation of life. Specifically, in Egyptian art, the god was depicted as a man with a ram's head who made on a wheel a human figure from clay. His cult center was located on the island of Elephantine. He was a local god of the kingdom of the cataracts who during the Hellenistic syncretism was identified with the solar god Ammon and Ra. His iconography was changed in Hellenistic times when he was depicted as a lion-headed radial serpent that wrapped around himself. The solar deity character is emphasized by the snake and the lion's head, which are symbols of the sun. The rays that crown it are usually 12 and refer to the zodiac signs, or 7 and refer to the planets. In some stones, Chnumis sits on a base or altar. Gnostics considered Chnumi as one of the main forms of the amulets of late antiquity. He was identified with the Gnostic god Ialdabaoth, creator of all. The presence of the god is often declared in amulets through his secret names as well as from his symbols. The most famous symbol of Chnumi, or Chnuvi, is the 3 Latin S connected to each other with a horizontal line. S, S, S. A variation of this character is the 3 angular Greek sigma or the 3 koppa. Perhaps the stick of Asclepios is related to them with the minting serpent, a symbol of health and healing gods. They are also paralleled with the stick of Aaron that was transformed into a serpent in front of Pharaoh. In a Christian text, the 3S conceal the number of the beast of Revelation, 666. 3 Greek Z with an horizontal line in the center, usually in an Ouroboros snake, symbolize the name of the god. This form of Zeta is considered to be an archaic form of the Hebrew Y, the initial letter of Yahweh. The 3 F, Vigama, also refer to the name of Yahweh, as well as the 2 inverted Z with a line in the center. The symbol Iao, ZZ, Pi Iota, refers to the god Iao, Chnuvi, and specifically to his solar origin and the god Yahweh through the Greek transcription of his tetragram Pi Iota. In late Roman times, the god became one of the 36 gods who ruled in the spaces of the 12 symbols of the zodiac, and especially in the second space of Cancer or in the first of Leo. The space in which Chnumis dominates corresponds to the stomach according to the theories related to the effect of the planets of health. According to popular belief, which was also supported by famous doctors of antiquity, such as Galinos, amulets in the form of knumi or knuvi operate apotropaically for indigestion and stomach ache. This theory is confirmed by inscriptions of relevant stones with the type pepte. The first 9 letters of the inscription Soror Meri Ofergdi Magro in our amulet were found in inscriptions of a similar type engraved on knumi or knuvi stones, in some cases in 2 or 3 line spirals. The suffix earrings of several of the inscriptions of knumi's magic stones can be related to the letters on either side of the sigmoid triple motif or stone, Iri et Nugusu. Although the first letters are the same, then the inscriptions differ in terms of letters remaining the same incomprehensible. Inscriptions of this type give the impression that they have no meaning and that they were engraved to impress people who ignore their mysterious sounds. But the soror is a magic code with which is a common feature of uterine amulets. The inscription Soror Mer Pharma Friurings appears on a magic papyrus along with Iao in a series of magic words and in another as a name for a demon of the great god. The same type is usually written on the amulets of the uterus. The use of the inscription on knumi amulets is surprising, but it may be an exchange between these two types of amulets, as the knumi snake is often seen in uterine amulets. It is possible that in amulets intended for women, the creators of amulets, through the magic stones in which knumi is depicted, promise treatment for various pains and disorders in the abdomen. The god Knumis or Knuvis, from protecting the stomach and abdomen in generally, gradually became the protector of the uterus. In an hematid of the 3rd century, Knumis, through the inscription engraved on one side, is said to be the protector of the uterus. With this capacity appears in amulets at least until the 12th century. One of the categories of amulets associated with the uterus and its problems are the sea cells, also known as Aphrodite's combs or amulets. Necklaces, bracelets, and various other jewelry adorned with sea cells were thought to protect women, especially from infertility. In conclusion, can be said with certainty that the unique Infiotida magic amulet, which was found in the cemetery in Agios Konstantinos Hill, in which Knumis was depicted, can be considered as a female burial gift. Knumis, in this case, must be considered as the protector of the uterus based on the inscription on the reverse. The aspect is reinforced by the finding of the 2 fragments of sea cells inside the tomb. Thank you.
I am so sorry for the discrepancies in audio and the PowerPoint. I have not heard it or listened to it before, and it was a bit difficult for me to just skip forward since it was not correlated, the audio and the presentation. So I do apologize.
I don't think there is something to apologize for. You did an excellent work. It was a very interesting presentation, I must say.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, you're here. Hello.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So this is my presentation, and it was supposed to be recorded because of technical problems I was afraid of. I just wanted to say hi and thank you to everybody for everything. It's really interesting. And as I said, I recorded it because of technical problems, and I think we just should start it and talk about afterwards.
Okay. So let me know if the sound is on.
Marks on gems with a Toroctony motif, or maybe rather of left-handers, bullhorns, and aberrant looks. After many years, I once again was concerned with the depiction of the so-called Toroctony on engraved gems. In just looking at the pieces, I have noticed some details and questions have arisen that I would like to share with you.
A group of about 18 examples repeatedly served as the basis of scholarly discussion on this topic on carved stones. For the most part, they were already included in the standard work of Martin Vermasseren's corpus or respectively in the work of his predecessor Cumont from the end of the 19th century, who in turn referred to Félix Lehard's book from 1847. In my opinion, 5 to 10 examples have so far remained unknown or unnoticed and should be included in the discussion, for instance the heliotrope in Perugia or the chalcedony in Paris. On the other hand, some gems have proven to be of modern origin over the decades and one should treat them accordingly in future discussions. For this, I would like to refer to the dark red carnelian in Amount of Gold in Baltimore, Walter's Art Gallery. The scene in grotto is oriented right, but, among other conspicuous features, Mithras cuts with his left hand and the bust of the sun god is unusually located in the upper right corner. I agree with Richard Gordon's comment on Roger Pierce's weblog from about 2 years ago, that this is a work from the modern period and it can be assumed that the imprint of a negatively cut seal could have been the template. The engraved gems, which take up the Tauroctony scene, do not form a unified group, but vary greatly in the extensiveness of the pictorial representation and also in details. Sometimes only some of the usual animals, snake, scorpion, dog and raven, accompany the scene. On other examples, all the animals are present, and then again, a lion or a second bird extends the group. On some gems, the scene is set in a cave and the busts of Sol and Luna are hovering above in the corners. One or both torchbearers may frame the scene, which may also contain stars or altars. Mithras is naked or wears oriental clothes and Phrygian cap. On other pieces, stars decorate the cloak, and rays surround the head. Nevertheless, some pieces share characteristics that deviate from the central cult images of the Mithraea. The bull is more often shown running than collapsed, according to Rainer Volkamer, the so-called Type A. Mithras looks not only back, but straight ahead. Only rarely the gaze shifts towards the viewer or frontally out of the picture. Mithras pulls the bull's head back by one of the horns instead of grabbing it by the nostrils or the bull's mouth. The dagger is often still hovering above the bull's head, so the moment of action is the one before the stab in the animal's shoulder. Only very few analogies to these features are known for smaller and mobile objects of the Mithraic cult such as vessels, lamps, matrices or statuettes and of course coins. Thus, the engraved images of the gems do not follow the iconographically clearly defined cult images and one may conclude that they do not represent a didactic mediation of Mithraic contents either. Generalizing, scientists distinguish the intaglios into magical and non-magical ones. Magical gems, cut for positive viewing, combine pictorial motifs with magical names and formulas. Usually 2 elaborated sides correspond in content. In contrast, the negative cut of seals aligns the scene to the left so that it appears positive in the imprint. For instance, I would like to show here a carnelian from Carnuntum, which has hardly been illustrated so far and is known mainly by short descriptions. I noticed that even several pieces do not fit into these 2 categories. On this greenish-black jasper of the Skoluda collection in Hamburg, the scene is oriented left apparently for sealing, but Mithras stabs with his right hand and would unusually do it with his left in an impression. The position of the legs, on the other hand, would be correct in the impression, as well as the orientation of the scene to the right. The weapon in Mithras' right hand also distinguishes the jasper formerly in Cairo from a seal, which in turn is indicated by the positions of the busts of Luna, left, and Sol, right. Similar in case of the horizontal hematite rectangle in a gold mounting, Baltimore, Walters Art Gallery. In the upper corners, heads of moon goddess and sun god, in the field 2 burning altars. Everything points to a seal, except the dagger in Mithras' right hand. Here Mithras stabs with his left and the posture would be correct in the impression. Nevertheless, on both the red jasper from Vienna and the chalcedony in Paris, the sun god appears in the imprint in the upper right corner instead of, as usual, in the left. This green chalcedony appeared 2013 in the art trade in Munich. The scene is oriented left. Mithras kneels on a strange-looking bull and holds the dagger in his left hand, accompanied by 2 birds, a dog, a snake and maybe a lion. The scorpion is missing. Above Sol and Luna, again not on right positions for sealing. Furthermore, Mithras turns around to Luna, wrongly in terms of content. It remains to note that the shape of the gemstone also differs from ancient examples. The Prehistoric Axe Head in Athens, National Museum, published by Arthur Cook in 1925, is supposed to be a reused amulet for unknown intention. Let us just look at the Mithras image framed by 2 magical words. The scene is oriented right, Mithras facing forward. He grabs the bull's horn with his right and stabs with his left. The dagger is still hovering over the bull's head. The arrangement of the animals is totally without sense. I would like to follow Richard Gordon, who concluded, as though the image had been inexpertly taken from a negative image, but only partly and again, from an image that already was not conclusive in itself, as we have seen with some examples before. This phenomenon also appears in copperplate engravings. Although Maurizio Buora and Attilio Mastrocinque drew attention to this illustration in the 1990s, it has never found significant entry into the research discussion. According to an unpublished notebook of Gian Domenico Bertoli and his correspondences with Antonio Francesco Gori, the 2-page intaglio was supposedly a find from Aquileia in 1748. 2 years later Gori depicted it in his book, Thesaurus Gemmarum Antiquarum, and described it as a heliotrope from the collection of Duke Rodolfo Struglio. 2 torchbearers, each with a raised torch, flank the scene facing right. Again, however, Mithras mistakenly holds the dagger in his left hand. We also see the already familiar grip around the horn and Mithras facing forward, or more accurately, almost downward at what he is doing. This example takes us to the 18th century setting of collectors, antiquarians and scholars, the famous heliotrope in Florence even further back to the 17th century. Leonardo Agostini first published the jasper in 1669 in the 2nd volume of a catalogue of his own collection. It is impossible here to discuss all these details, nor can I go into the scholarly discussion on the gemstone that was triggered in 1670 by an anonymous recension in the Giornale de Letterati. I am only pointing out that the engraver, based on his own interpretation, made some changes that experts discuss to this day as being factually present on the stone. For example, due to damage to the stone, the snake was lost except for the head, which the engraver mistakenly interprets as a dolphin. After several reprints and reuse, the engraving appears in 1732 in Gori's Museum Florentinum, but now reversed. In my opinion, this is the template for the yellowish carnelian from Aquileia in Udine, Museo Civico. Regardless of the fact that some experts classified it as a post-ancient work more than a decade ago, this piece continued to be involved in the research discussion on tauroctony in ancient glyptic. Dissatisfaction with the stylistic inaccuracies of copperplate engravings led to the fashion in the 18th century for three-dimensional impressions of the originals made of sealing wax, plaster or sulfur as well as glass. With the help of intermediate molds, it was possible to produce not only impressions, but also exact copies made of glass. The famous collector, Baron Philipp von Stosch, also learned this art from Wilhelm Homburg in 1713 and used it to complete his collection. From Joachim Winckelmann's description of the Stosch collection, we know that it also contained glass copies of the Florentine heliotrope. Presumably, this glass paste in the collection of the Martin von Wagner Museum in Würzburg originated in Philipp Daniel Lippert's workshop. Around the middle of the 18th century, he likewise offered both impressions and copies, in either a plaster-like paste or glass. Another glass paste with tauroctony motif from the former Stosch collection appears in Lahard and Cumont. Both authors suppose it to be an imitation of a banded sard, which was once in the possession of Dr. Doro and later, like the glass paste of Stosch, had come into the collection of antiquities in Berlin. Along with the gems, Frederick II had acquired the glass pastes from Stosch's collection in 1765. In his description, Adolf Furtwängler 1896 still lists a sard with corresponding representation from the Kluge collection. In today's publications of the collection it is no longer included. Stosch's glass copy of it is also missing. Like all the others, it has been lost since the Second World War and has come down to us only through various collections of casts, so-called dactyliotheques, from the 18th century. For example, from the manufactory of Stosch's servant, Christian Dane, we find a cast of the piece discussed here in a drawer of a wooden cabinet with plaster casts in the British Museum, London. Thanks to the Beazley Archive in Oxford making photographs of a complete Tassie set in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London available online, it appears that Stosch's glass paste also was represented among the Tassie casts. A comparison with the impression of the Baltimore hematite finally shows it to be an exact match. It therefore must be a creation based on Stosch's copy, which is especially supported by the unusual shape. For its origin, I assume the period of the end of the 18th century, when the piece got publicity through casts and impressions, and 1817, when the 4th Duke of Marlborough purchased the hematite, as we know. It is a copy or a copy of a copy and not made after an impression as in the following and last case I would like to present. In 2015, the Kunsthaus Lempertz in Cologne auctioned a brooch with engraved gems, both ancient and modern. One of the modern gems in cord wire framing fits the theme I am following here. However, the inspiration for this piece was a cast. Obviously, the material that scholars have treated repeatedly over a long period would have to be re-examined in order to detect modern pieces and distinguish them from ancient ones. Only then we can move on to the question regarding content and use of ancient gems with a tauroctony motif.
So, any questions?
Hello, Simone. I have to tell you something. I'm following an old gem from Agostini. It's Amores playing sports. And in that context, I have found out that these rectangles with the curved sides, they are often a post-antique. So
Yeah.
gem you are missing in doubt has the same form, and I would totally agree with you.
I think it's because they are made after glass pastes.
Yeah.
And glass pastes often have
this form.
shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, is Claudia Wagner online?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Anna Hamad is my name.
Yeah.
I want to congratulate you for this subject, for the beautiful presentation. And
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to add that you have such a gem with such a depiction in a collection of a small museum in Romania. It's quite unknown. It has recently published by Gabriela Pip. So maybe you could include it in your study.
Oh, that would be great if you could send me a picture or something.
For sure, it's a green
note
jasper.
on the publication.
Yes, for sure.
Just by email.
For sure.
That
So,
would be really great.
Yeah. I can hardly wait to publish.
Thanks.
And to read, of course. Congratulations.